Mark Weston had faced criminals, corruption, even violent standoffs, but none of those had left him this shaken. Seeing his daughter's side bandaged, knowing someone had dared lay a hand on her cut deeper than anything he'd dealt with, in uniform. That evening while Emily rested, Mark walked the perimeter of his backyard. His boots crunched against the gravel, edging the grass as he scanned the tree line near the trail. His training made him notice small things, fresh shoe impressions near the gate, the angle of the camera mounted above the HOA utility post, and the motion sensor light that, strangely, hadn't triggered. He turned toward the trail, retracing the scene from earlier. Everything about it felt wrong. Karen's sudden aggression wasn't just a moment of rage, it was deliberate. Her control over the neighborhood had been tolerated by residents too tired or too afraid to fight back. But now she had gone too far. Mark stopped near the spot where it had happened. A small streak of blood remained on a stone. He crouched down, brushing a finger across it. Dry. The HOA groundskeeper hadn't cleaned it. He looked up. That camera should have recorded it, part of the security system Karen herself lobbied for. But when he tried to pull footage from the public server earlier, all he found was a no data available screen during the exact time Emily was out. Convenient. He stood and took a photo of the bloodstain, then the camera, then his watch. 6:47 p.m. Documentation was habit, and habit saved careers. Back at the house, he checked Jasper's footage again. The camera had caught everything leading up to the confrontation: Molly walking, Jasper alerting, even Karen's approach. But 5 seconds before she raised her hand, the screen fizzed. When it cleared, Emily was already backing away. The skip was surgical, too clean to be coincidence. He sat back in his office chair. The room dim, only the glow of his monitor reflecting off his face. Mark had pulled footage from tactical drones, surveillance vans, and body cams. His entire career. This wasn't malfunction. This was tampering. But who had access to Jasper's camera? Only his household, and the HOA security system. Only board members and the contracted IT firm, both hired and supervised by Karen. He exhaled slowly, staring at a printout of the HOA board roster. 5 names. Karen was at the top. 2 had signed off on the denial of Emily's injury complaint within hours of the incident. No investigation, no outreach, not even a visit, just silence. Mark clicked open his secure case and pulled out an encrypted USB stick. He began compiling files, emails from the HOA medical records, timestamped photos, and the glitching footage. He labeled the folder, Briarwood Exposure. Just before midnight, he received a call. It wasn't from the HOA, it was from someone he hadn't spoken to in 2 years. "I heard about your daughter," the voice said. "Listen carefully. You need to stay ahead of this. This isn't just a crazy neighbor situation. There's money. INVOLVED. And some of these people, they're protected." "Protected by who?" Mark asked. "Developers. Insiders. Your HOA president didn't get that house with the secretary's pension, and you didn't hear this from me." The line went dead. Mark stared into the dark. He knew now this was bigger than Karen, much bigger. And they'd just made a very dangerous mistake. The next morning arrived without sunlight. Thick clouds sat low over Briarwood Lakes, giving the streets a dull gray glow. Mark Weston stood at the window, coffee untouched in his hand, watching the HOA's landscaping van roll by. The driver didn't look up. No one ever did. Not anymore. Emily stayed in her room that day. Jasper wouldn't leave her side, sensing the tension lingering in the walls. Mark kept the house quiet, shielding her from the storm he was about to bring. By mid-morning, he drove to the HOA office, an unnecessary building paid for by excessive dues and decorated with artificial calm. The inside smelled like paper and citrus spray. Karen was already there, seated behind the glass window like she belonged on a throne. "Mark," she said with a brittle smile, "we're handling your complaint. There's a process, as you know, but the board didn't find sufficient cause to take action." He didn't sit, he simply stared at her. "You slashed at my daughter." Karen's smile didn't waver. "That's a dangerous accusation, especially in a civil setting. Emily wasn't supposed to be on that trail. Section 3C states unaccompanied minors and pets, especially aggressive ones, must avoid shared use pathways. She wasn't unaccompanied. She had her service dog, and that dog has more training than you have sense." Karen leaned forward, slightly. "Watch your tone." Mark leaned closer. "I already am," very carefully. Silence stretched between them. Mark dropped a flash drive on the counter. "Here's a copy of your camera footage from yesterday. I pulled it from the encrypted cloud backup. Your tech team forgot to scrub. Watch it, frame by frame." Karen didn't touch the drive. "You really want this to escalate?" she said. "It already has." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Outside, he dialed a number he hadn't used since Internal Affairs last audited his unit. "Major Crimes Division. Detective Reed. It's Weston. I need digital forensics. Quiet, clean, and fast." There was a pause. "What's the target?" "Small-town HOA looks harmless." "It's not." "Send the package." Mark did. He uploaded everything: glitched videos, internal HOA documents, recent fines issued disproportionately to certain residents, financial reports that didn't quite add up. He had been tracking the pattern for weeks now, subconsciously, without realizing why it bothered him until Emily was hurt. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were selectively targeting potential newcomers, lower-income families, single parents, and homeowners with disabilities. Once a violation stuck, the fines grew. If you missed a payment, they charged more, until eventually, people sold, quickly, desperately, and the buyers, always the same investment group, quiet, fast, and always cash. Karen was the face of it, but someone else was writing the checks. Later that night, as Mark reviewed more footage from his backyard, an alert popped up, motion detected, timestamp, 10:12 p.m. He clicked play. Karen stood just beyond the fence, staring into the house, not moving, just watching. The camera caught her expression, no fear, no regret, just a blank, unwavering stare. Mark stared at the footage long after it ended. He locked the doors. Then, for the first time in years, he retrieved the small safe beneath his closet floor. Inside it sat his sidearm, cleaned, loaded, untouched, since retirement. He laid it on the table, next to Jasper's chewed leash and Emily's broken glasses. Whatever. Karen thought this was whatever game she believed she was winning. Mark was no longer playing by her rules. Tomorrow, he would go to the next board meeting, but he wouldn't be asking questions. He'd be exposing the truth. The Briarwood Lakes HOA board meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m., held inside the community center, a building that looked more like a suburban chapel than a place where property disputes turned into war. Mark arrived 10 minutes early, dressed in plain clothes but carrying himself with the quiet intensity of someone used to courtrooms and crime scenes. A few neighbors sat scattered in the rows of chairs. Most were older couples, some alone, others whispering. Nobody smiled. They looked at Mark like they knew something was coming, but didn't dare ask what. Karen entered from the back hallway, flanked by two board members, Robert Finch, the treasurer, and Sheila Young, the secretary. Mark had already done his research on them. Finch had declared bankruptcy 5 years ago. Today, he owned a second home in Arizona. Sheila had no social media, no public work history, and somehow still paid cash for her Audi. Karen opened the meeting with the usual driveway maintenance updates, dog leash reminders, recycling policy complaints. Then she reached item number 5, community safety concerns. Our neighborhood has recently experienced an unfortunate altercation involving a resident's child and service animal. After internal review, no fault has been determined, and we consider the matter closed. Mark stood up. Karen's eyes flicked to him. Mr. Weston, this is not a forum for debate. It isn't debate, he said. It's disclosure. He pulled a small remote from his coat pocket and pointed it at the projector behind her. Before anyone could stop him, a slideshow began. First slide, a still image of Karen slashing toward Emily, frame by frame sequence. Pulled from cloud recovery. Second slide, a spreadsheet of fine notices disproportionately sent to 10 house, of them new buyers or single parents. Third slide, wire transfer records from Finch's private account, traced back to a shell company connected to a real estate acquisition firm. Karen's voice trembled for the first time. You are not authorized to. I am, Mark interrupted. Deputy Commissioner Mark Weston, currently on approved leave status, and what I'm showing is evidence of coordinated financial pressure designed to push out vulnerable residents so a third party can snatch up foreclosed properties. Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Then the murmurs started, residents asking each other about fines, about citations that came without warnings, about unexplained power shutoffs after non-payment. Karen leaned on the podium, her smile now gone. Sheila stood up. That data was illegally obtained. No, Mark said calmly. It was subpoenaed. As of this morning. He looked at the room. I've seen organized rackets before. They always hide under official names. This one hid under an HOA. The crime isn't in the paperwork, it's in the pattern. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A brief blackout, then the screen went dark. Karen grabbed her phone, whispering urgently to someone on the other end. Mark stepped off the small platform and walked toward the exit. I suggest you all check your email in about 5 minutes, he said. I've sent everything, videos, records, and statements to every homeowner in Briarwood Lakes. Before the door closed behind him, he added, this is bigger than just fines, and someone maybe all live in New. Outside, the air had turned cool and windless. A single black SUV sat across the street, engine running, no lights on. He didn't recognize it. As he walked past it, the window lowered half an inch. No voice, just silence. Mark kept walking, but his instincts screamed. He reached into his coat, unlocking the small holster near his ribs. They weren't just trying to silence him through meetings anymore. Someone had just changed the rules. Mark didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, the curtains drawn, lights low, sidearm on the desk. His phone buzzed, non-stop emails from neighbors who had read the files he sent. Most were shocked. Some were terrified. And 2 had already told him they'd received anonymous threats just hours after speaking out. By morning, Briarwood Lakes wasn't quiet anymore. Lawns still looked perfect, but the people behind them had started to whisper. Conversations happened, behind hedges, on porches, in inboxes, and Karen. She was nowhere to be seen. Her house, usually lit like a showroom, was dark. No movement, no car. It was as if she'd vanished. But Mark didn't believe in vanishing, only hiding. He needed answers, and there was one person left to talk to. Ron Ellery had once served as HOA vice president before he resigned without explanation 2 years ago. Since then, he'd become a recluse, barely seen around the neighborhood. Mark drove to his house just past noon. The door opened before he knocked. Ron looked thinner than his old picture. Nervous, tired. "I figured it'd be you," he said. "Come in." The house was cluttered, walls lined with old HOA binders and post-it notes. No TV, just a stack of old letters next to a laptop, sealed in plastic wrap. Mark sat across from him without speaking. Ron cleared his throat. "I tried to blow the whistle once. On Karen, on Finch, thought I could stop it before it got ugly. What happened? They bought out the tech guy. Board meetings got cut shorter. Cameras stopped saving backups. Then one night, someone broke into my garage, left a letter taped to my windshield. No threats. Just a date, and a list of names. Mine was on it." Mark leaned forward. "Do you still have the letter?" Ron stood and pulled a plastic folder from a drawer. Inside was a wrinkled sheet of paper, handwritten in thick black ink. 9/14, targeted, for removal. Ellery, Novak, Samara, Weston. Mark's eyes froze. "Weston me," Ron nodded. "That's why I knew you'd show up eventually." Mark stared at the date. It was 3 days away. He looked up. "Do you know who's behind the buying group?" Ron hesitated. "Not exactly, but every purchase is processed through a title firm called Greenledge Property Solutions. You look up their ownership records, it leads you to a P.O. box. And that P.O. box traces back to a property manager in another state who just happens to be Karen's cousin." The knot inside Mark's chest tightened. This wasn't about neighborhood disputes anymore. This was a shell game. A full-blown real estate laundering scheme using HOA policy as a weapon. And now, they were accelerating. That as Mark left Ron's house, he saw something strange. A black SUV parked across the street. The same one from the meeting, but now, it was empty. Engine cold. He walked up to it, careful, cautious, no one inside. No trace of a driver, but on the windshield under the wiper was a single photo. It was of Emily. She was walking Jasper. The timestamp was from 2 days ago. Mark's grip on the picture tightened. No message, no words, just a threat. He got back into his truck and drove straight to City Hall. This was no longer just about HOA corruption, it was about protecting his daughter. And if that meant taking down every person involved, every board member, every silent partner, every shadow in a suit, then so be it. The time for talking was over. Mark sat alone in the dimly lit conference room at City Hall, the photo of Emily resting face up on the polished oak table. His mind raced through the evidence, the threats, and the growing web of deception. This was no longer just a local dispute, it was a conspiracy that stretched far beyond the manicured lawns of Briarwood Lakes. His phone buzzed. Detective Reed's name flashed on the screen. Mark Reed's voice was low but urgent. "We've dug into Greenledge Property Solutions. They're laundering money through multiple shell companies. It's connected to a nationwide real estate syndicate." Mark exhaled. "I need to catch them in the act. Something solid. Something the DA can't ignore. We're setting up a sting. Coordinating with federal agents, but it's risky." You and Mark didn't hesitate. "I'm already in." The next few days were a blur. Mark worked closely with law enforcement, setting up surveillance, tracking financial flows, and gathering testimonies from homeowners too afraid to speak up publicly. He installed discrete cameras on his property, wired into a private network off the HOA system. He and Emily rehearsed safety drills, while Jasper seemed to sense the rising tension, pacing the house with quiet vigilance. Then came the night. Around 2 a.m., Mark's phone buzzed. Motion detected near the back fence. He grabbed his flashlight and quietly slipped outside. The air was cold, thick with the scent of pine and wet earth through the trees. He spotted movement. 3 figures crouched low near the boundary, one carrying a crowbar. Mark's heart hammered. They were back. He stayed hidden, signaling federal agents waiting nearby. The figures whispered urgently, unaware that cameras were recording their every move. Suddenly, Karen appeared, her face lit by the glow of her phone screen as she relayed instructions. Mark felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just a power play anymore. It was intimidation, trespassing, and possibly worse. The agents moved in silently. Surrounding the group, one shouted, "Freeze! Hands where we can see them!" Chaos erupted. The trespassers scrambled, but 2 were quickly restrained. Karen tried to run but was tackled near the fence line. Mark approached, catching his breath. "It's over, Karen." Her eyes flashed with fury, but also fear. "Do you know what happens when people like you cross the line?" Mark said quietly. She spat on the ground. "This isn't over. You think your badge can protect you? I'm just a small part of something bigger. You're meddling in things you don't understand." Mark looked at the agents escorting her away and thought about Emily. About all the families caught in this web. It wasn't just a fight for one child's safety anymore. It was a battle for the soul of their community. Back home, Emily smiled. Faintly for the first time in days, Jasper rested his head on her lap. Mark sat beside them, pulling out his phone. He opened a private group message. He'd start a network of homeowners ready to stand together. This is only the beginning. He typed, "We take back our homes. We protect our families. Together." As he looked out the window, he knew the road ahead was long. But for Emily, for Briarwood Lakes, justice was finally on the move. The arrest of Karen and her accomplices was only the beginning. Mark knew there was a larger force operating behind the scenes, someone who had pulled strings, protected the HOA's darkest secrets, and exploited Briarwood Lakes for personal gain. Back at the precinct, forensic analysts sifted through Karen's devices, emails, encrypted messages, financial records. It was a trove waiting to be unlocked. Among the files, Mark found one name that stood out: Lucas Hammond. Lucas Hammond was a local real estate magnate, known for quietly acquiring properties across the county, often outbidding legitimate homeowners with suspiciously quick cash offers. His name had never been publicly linked to the HOA, but Mark's gut told him Hammond was the mastermind. Determined, Mark reached out to a trusted journalist with a reputation for exposing corruption. He shared the evidence, urging a coordinated investigation. The journalist's quick follow-up brought unexpected attention, pressuring authorities to act faster. Meanwhile, the community began to heal. Emily's wounds were physical and emotional, but the support from neighbors strengthened her spirit. Families who once felt isolated started attending meetings, demanding transparency and reform. Mark, however, was restless. He spent long nights poring over financial statements, following trails of money that twisted through offshore accounts and dummy corporations. The deeper he dug, the more complex the web became. One evening, a knock on the door startled him. Outside stood Ron Ellery, the former HOA vice president, looking more determined than before. "I have something you need to see," Ron said, handing over a small envelope. Inside were documents, bank statements, contracts, and a ledger detailing payments from Hammond's companies to board members. "This isn't just about land grabs," Ron whispered. "It's bribery, extortion, even threats. They've been running this scam for years." Mark's jaw clenched. The battle was no longer just about his family or Briarwood Lakes. It was about dismantling a network that had corrupted an entire region. The next day, Mark convened a meeting with local law enforcement, community leaders, and federal agents. He laid out the plan: simultaneous raids on Hammond's properties, freezing his assets, and subpoenaing all involved parties. As they finalized the strategy, Mark's phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number: "You're getting close. Back off or Emily pays the price." Mark stared at the screen, anger mixing with fear. The stakes had never been higher. That night, Mark sat beside Emily's bed. Jasper lay quietly. Sensing the tension, he promised her silently that he would protect her no matter what. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. The dawn was heavy with silence as Mark and the federal team prepared for the raids. Every detail had been checked and rechecked. Today would decide the future of Briarwood Lakes and the safety of every family caught in the shadows. Mark drove past familiar streets, his eyes scanning every face, every lawn, knowing the battle was about to reach its peak. The first raid hit Hammond's luxury office. Agents swarmed the building, seizing computers, files, and safe deposit boxes. The atmosphere was electric, tension thick as officers uncovered mountains of evidence, forged contracts, bribery ledgers, payments funneled through offshore accounts. But Hammond himself was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, at the HOA Community Center, Karen's trial was underway. Mark watched from the courtroom gallery, his heart heavy but resolute. Karen's defense tried to paint her as a scapegoat, a pawn in a bigger game, but Mark and the prosecution dismantled every lie, presenting damning footage, financial records, and witness testimonies. Outside the courthouse, neighbors gathered quietly. For the first time in years, they looked hopeful. That night, Mark received an anonymous tip. Hammond was hiding at a secluded lake house, several hours away. Without hesitation, Mark and a small task force headed out. The lake was shrouded in mist. The only sounds the lapping water and distant owl calls. Mark approached the dock, gun drawn, heart pounding. Inside the house, Hammond was caught off guard, clutching a briefcase full of documents. "I knew you'd come," Hammond sneered. "But you don't understand the game you're playing." Mark didn't respond. The handcuffs clicked. Back home, Emily slept peacefully, unaware of the final pieces falling into place. Jasper lay at her feet, vigilant. Mark sat by the window, watching the stars. He knew this fight wasn't just about one HOA president or one developer. It was about reclaiming power from those who used it to destroy lives. And now, with Hammond in custody, Briarwood Lakes could finally begin to heal. With Lucas Hammond behind bars and Karen facing trial, Briarwood Lakes seemed poised for a fresh start. But Mark Weston knew better than to believe the nightmare was over. The courtroom was packed. Karen sat silent, her expression unreadable. Mark watched as the judge read the charges: conspiracy, assault, racketeering, the full weight of the law finally catching up to the woman who had scarred his daughter and terrorized a committee. But just as the verdict was about to be announced, a sudden interruption sent a ripple through the courtroom. A lawyer for Karen's defense stood, holding up a sealed envelope. Inside was a recording, a confession from a previously unknown HOA board member. Someone claiming to be the real architect of the scheme, a shadow figure pulling strings from behind the scenes. A figure no one suspected. The courtroom gasped. The revelation hit Mark like a thunderclap. Karen had been just a pawn after all. The investigation swung back into motion. Mark and his team worked feverishly, unraveling the threads leading to a local politician with ambitions far beyond Briarwood Lakes. This man had used the HOA as a tool to intimidate residents and funnel public land deals through private channels, lining pockets while forcing families out. But Mark was ready. With evidence, eyewitness testimony, and public support, the politician was arrested. As the sun set over Briarwood Lakes, Mark sat in his living room, Emily playing nearby with Jasper. The scars were healing not just on her skin, but in her smile. Mark reflected on the cost of truth, the danger, the sleepless nights, the threats, but also the strength found in fighting for what was right. He spoke softly to Emily. "We did this together." She looked up, eyes bright. "No more scary neighbors." "No more," Mark promised. The story of Briarwood Lakes is a warning. Sometimes, the real danger hides behind white picket fences and rule books. But when courage meets truth, justice can break through even the darkest shadows. Call to action. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare or felt powerless against local corruption, hit subscribe and share this story. Together, we stand stronger. And remember, never let fear silence you, because sometimes the smallest voices change the biggest systems.